The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening. Welcome to Bronxtalk. Tonight we continue our series of Bronx political debates with the 34th Senatorial District, which includes the entire East Bronx from Hunts Point, including Throgs Neck, up into Pelham Bay, and into parts of Westchester. It also snakes around through the Central Bronx into Van Cortlandt Park and Riverdale. The incumbent is Senator Jeff Klein. He's being challenged in the September 9th Democratic primary by former Attorney General, Assemblyman, and Councilman Oliver Capel. Both are, of course, familiar public figures in the borough of the Bronx. We don't take phone calls during our debates, but you can send us comments via email or on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronxtalk Senator Jeff Klein. Nice to have you, sir.
Pleasure to be back, Gary.
And Mr. Oliver Capel, nice to have you back.
Good to be back again. I'm here many times.
I know. We're two frequent guests. It's nice to have them both on the show in this particular scenario. Gentlemen, the way we're going to do our rules tonight, we'll ask a question to one candidate who will respond, leading to a free-flowing discussion on the subject, with the original respondent having the final word. A note for viewers, questions include those submitted by the candidates themselves. Each will have an opportunity to present a 1-minute closing statement. Again, both of you, thank you for your participation. By prior agreement, the first question to you, Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mr. Capel, you've accused Mr. Klein of disloyalty to fundamental democratic principles. But really, in light of your bold opposition to term limits as a city councilman, your endorsement of Mayor Bloomberg for re-election over Democrat Bill Thompson, and even your embracing of the old guard when it came to reforming the Bronx Democratic Party, which turned out to be a failed effort, isn't your critique of Mr. Klein and the IDC really very hypocritical?
Absolutely not, in no way. When I endorsed Mayor Bloomberg, I thought he'd done a good job, so I endorsed him. I don't believe in term limits. I believe the voters should decide who they want. I think term limits are anti-democratic. And the fact is, we had an inter-party fight, and I took one side, not the other, but was within the Democratic Party. Senator Klein has orchestrated the most outrageous political betrayal, not only of the Democratic Party, but of the people of the Bronx, by, after campaigning hard in 2010 for a Democratic majority, when the Democrats finally got the majority in 2012, he and 3 colleagues moved over, made a deal with Dean Skelos, the Republican leader, and allowed the Republicans to remain in control in the state Senate. And that's not only a political betrayal. It is, as I say, a betrayal of the people of the Bronx. Why do I say that? The Bronx, the poorest borough, the poorest county, and the minimum wage is important to poor people who have modest jobs. The minimum wage is $8 an hour now. It'd be $9 an hour if the Democrats were in control. One of the things that the Hispanic community, the Latino community is most interested in is the DREAM Act, to allow immigrant students who were brought here by their parents to go to state university, get in-state tuition, to be eligible for tuition assistance. The DREAM Act didn't pass. Why didn't it pass? Because in a cynical maneuver, Senator Klein threw the DREAM Act out on an afternoon when at least one supporter was out of Albany, no time for lobbyists to act, and the DREAM Act was defeated. Campaign finance law. He says campaign finance reform and some sort of public finance campaigns is one of the most important things that he believes in. He says that, and then by his alliance with Skelos, they blocked any consideration of campaign finance reform. So the fact of the matter is that my charge of Senator Klein is, I think, absolutely well-founded. And by the way, if you disagreed with some of the things I do, that doesn't make the things he does right.
Senator, I'm assuming you have something you want to say about this.
A lot to say, Gary, and my opponent is not true. He's distorting the record. He's distorting history. I decided to do something different. I think we all can take a step back and remember the dysfunction of the Democratic Conference. Everyone knows the name Pedro Espada, Hiram Montserrat, Carl Kruger. I got tired of it. I thought there was a better way. This was a time when the Brennan Center, a good government group, called the state Senate and the Albany legislature the most functioned legislature in the country. Myself and 3 other Democrats at the time took a step back, formed the Independent Democratic Conference, and we should be credited, and we are credited, with making government work again. We passed marriage equality. We passed the SAFE Act, the most comprehensive gun control law in the nation. We increased the minimum wage to $9, 2015. That's what all the advocates wanted at the time. We actually also helped senior citizens with soaring rents by imposing a rent freeze for seniors, helping seniors with prescription drug costs by expanding the EPIC program. These are core Democratic legislative accomplishments, and I'm very proud of them. My opponent, unfortunately, thought the will of the voters should be overturned. They passed term limits twice through a referendum. My opponent was the lead sponsor, Mayor Bloomberg's puppet, in introducing this piece of legislation. And then to make matters worse, he endorses the Republican standard bearer, Mayor Bloomberg, against a good Democrat and someone who I think would have made a great mayor, Billy Thompson. I never endorsed a Republican. I never will.
Okay, presumably you have something to say.
Yeah, I do have something to say. First of all, Senator Klein, who talks about Bloomberg in such negative tones, took a $10,000 campaign contribution from Mayor Bloomberg, and his IDC that he formed, those 4 people that he calls the Independent Democratic Conference, they took $75,000 from Mayor Bloomberg. So let's not distort the record. The fact of the matter is that while certainly some good things happened in the Senate, those things would have happened if the Democrats were in the majority, and the things I talked about, the minimum wage would have been higher. Yes, it was increased. Senator Klein's correct. But it wasn't increased as it should be $10.10 an hour now. The Assembly said they're for that. Nothing's happened because the Senate won't do anything about it. The fact is that the DREAM Act should have passed and didn't. The fact is that campaign finance reform, perhaps the most important thing we can do about our political system because of the Supreme Court, nothing's happened on that. Why has nothing happened on that? Because Dean Skelos blocks it, and Dean Skelos has the power to block it because of Senator Klein. But there's one other important thing you got to remember. Because Dean Skelos has power, he's able to raise millions of dollars, which is being used to elect more Republicans. I heard Senator Klein say on TV the other day that we've got to elect more Democrats. What he did allows the Republicans to continue to be in power.
Well, just to pivot back, Mayor Bloomberg did give myself and the IDC, Political Action Committee, a contribution, and it was based on the great work we did. I continue to deliver for the city of New York, just the same reason why Mayor de Blasio is supporting my candidacy. I got universal pre-K done, $300 million for the next 5 years for free full-time universal pre-K. And I didn't even have to endorse Mayor Bloomberg because I endorsed Mayor de Blasio because he's a Democrat and I support Democrats.
You get the final word here, sir.
Well, first of all, we both endorsed Bill Thompson the last time out, so we didn't have a disagreement on that. But the most important thing is that he got the support of Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo. How? After I said I would run, they said, and they said it to me, that they would support me if he didn't switch to say that he would vote with the Democrats in January. He's now switched. He now says he's going to vote with the Democrats in January.
Well, let me just correct what's going on.
Well, wait, let me just finish.
Sure.
The fact of the matter is that's why he switched. I've already won this contest because even if I lost the primary, which I don't intend to do, he's now got to vote with the Democrats and put the Democrats in the majority, which is what should have happened 2 years ago.
Well, first of all, my first question
is,
is why is my opponent running in the first place? Other than he can't bear to face the will of the voters again, overturn term limits, once again decided to run, even though he just acknowledged that we are forming a new coalition, the Independent Democratic Conference and the Democratic Conference, and there's a lot of excitement. Mayor de Blasio is supporting it. Governor Cuomo, every labor union is on board because they realize the work I've done has to continue. Now we have to get enough Democratic votes to pass the DREAM Act. We need enough Democratic votes to pass campaign finance reform. Yes, we need more Democratic votes, and we can achieve that to make sure we codify Roe v. Wade and give a woman's right to choose in New York.
Last comment from you, and then we'll move on.
The last comment I would make is that the people who didn't earn $10 an hour in the last year, the poor thousands of people in the Bronx who were deprived of $40 a week or $80 a week. They've had to wait because of what Senator Klein has done. He was forced to change. And why did I run? I'll tell you why I ran. Because the Working Families Party and the Democrats in the Senate asked me to run last summer because of what he had done. Now, they've pulled back.
I do want to move on.
Okay,
They pulled back their support.
They pulled back because he agreed to switch.
Because they're all supporting this new coalition to get things
Senator
done.
Klein, there's been a pretty stiff debate in Albany about ethics reform. Why were you part of a group that sued the Moreland Commission to stop it from investigating private activities of legislators? Why not just let the commission do its work and see what it turns up?
Sure. Well, first, I was the first leader that came out in favor of the mission of the Moreland Commission, because in the beginning, when the governor announced the formation, the purpose was to have policy debates and hearings to form policy and legislative initiatives for ethics reform and campaign finance reform. Ethics reform we were able to achieve, but we fell short on campaign finance reform. So I don't think the Moreland Commission should have been disbanded because they didn't achieve everything they set out to do. I believe that under the letter of the law in the state constitution, a commission set up by the governor does not have the right to investigate the legislature. It's a separate branch of government. While I agree with their findings, I don't think they have a right to investigate another branch of the legislature.
Would you have been in favor of some other
Well,
body?
again,
or,
I think...
in other words, how would
sure,
you
well,
go about
we have a
doing
United
it?
States attorney. We have district attorneys that do an excellent job in investigating the legislature. Even the attorney general has the ability to do that.
Your thoughts, sir?
Yeah. Senator Klein has opposed revealing who his clients are, even to the Moreland Commission. Why is he doing that? He says on his financial disclosure he does civil litigation, but he doesn't name the types of companies that he represents. I suspect he represents a lot of nursing homes. He's on the board of one of the nursing homes. Now, that should be revealed. I believe that the clients of legislators should be revealed. And if there's something confidential, they can ask for a waiver. We have waivers now in our financial disclosure question, but generally it should be revealed. He didn't say a word, by the way, when the governor canceled the Moreland Commission. He didn't say a word. He didn't jump up as one of the leaders of the Senate and say, no, 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 Governor, you shouldn't do this. In the midst of investigations, that commission was disbanded. Investigations that included looking at his thing. Now, they didn't find anything. I'm not saying they found it, but it was the midst of looking at his thing. It obviously wasn't concluded. We don't know whether there's something there or not. But in the midst of looking at his records and other people's records, the governor canceled the Moreland.
You know, once again, you know, my opponent is giving you half-truths. First of all, the transparency requirements and what we're supposed to do as far as disclosure is far more muscular than what the former councilman had to do when he was in the city council. First of all, we have to disclose almost to the exact amount what our outside income is, and we have to disclose if we have a client that has business before the state of New York or a client that has any lobbying connections. I have no business clients. I have no clients that have any business before the state, so I'm not required to disclose them.
Mr. Capel, Mr. Klein's campaign...
He hasn't disclosed any of his clients.
Mr. Klein's campaign is charged that you missed a
I disclose my sources of income, bit by bit, piece by piece, of what my law firm does, and also my part-time teaching job, which I did for a year.
Mr. Klein's campaign is charged, sir, that you missed a golden zoning opportunity to permanently prevent the unwanted development of Montefiore Medical Center near Riverdale Avenue. And they claim it's because your wife, Lorraine Coyle Capel, who's a real estate attorney, had represented homeowners who sold their property to a developer with construction interests in that neighborhood. And they say that it was Senator Klein who came up with legislation that does draw a line to reform the project to the community's specifications, in essence bailing out something you ought to have prevented as a councilman. Also, there are concerns in that case that you put personal profit above your community's best interests.
Okay. First of all, with respect to the rezoning, I passed a comprehensive rezoning in conjunction with the Community Board and the City Planning Commission of all of Central Riverdale and incidentally North Riverdale as well. At the time that passed, a number of developers, including Howard Jonas, who just gave him $10,000, was building a huge skyscraper in Riverdale. We passed zoning changes to eliminate the possibility. The particular place where Montefiore wants to build, the City Planning Commission said that could not be downzoned. That, by the way, is not the place where there were a couple of homes where my wife would never represented a developer. She represented two owners of private homes who sold their homes. She never represented a developer. It had nothing to do with me. I never did anything to advance any of those interests. And as I say again, The rezoning of Riverdale was my responsibility with the Community Board and the City Planning Commission, and there was never a suggestion that the place where Montefiore is going to build its building was going to be rezoned. That's just a completely fallacious charge. But it's interesting to note that the company or the people building the Montefiore Center just gave Senator Klein $10,000, and he accepted that campaign contribution. A total outrage as far as I'm concerned. How could he do that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, Gary, because I think it goes to my mission of what I try to accomplish as state senator. I want to pass meaningful legislation in Albany that helps my constituents move forward. And also, I fight each and every day on local overdevelopment issues. And unfortunately, I find myself, over the last year especially, cleaning up my opponent's messes. He had every opportunity to downzone that area, to make sure Montefiore wasn't going to propose this 11-story monstrosity. Another development that I fought and I won on is a project on Broadway, where my opponent actually supported and gave city funding to. You were going to have the severely mentally disabled, I'm talking people who have bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, living alongside seniors. The people were outraged. We had about 1,000 people at a meeting where he announced his support for this position, and he said he knew better than the community. I opposed that project. We won. As far as the Montefiore development, I had to turn around and pass a piece of legislation with Assemblyman Dinowitz, which actually is going to stop this project, because now any development in the Bronx that's over 3 stories has to go through a lengthy review process, take into account zoning issues, density, whether or not the community needs the project in the first place. That's because of me. And to turn around and say somehow I was influenced by a contribution is ludicrous. I stopped the building of that project now for over 6 months. That developer in Montefiore are losing money each and every day on that project thanks to me.
You get the final word on
well,
this. Well,
interestingly enough, that legislation only delays the project, and interestingly, delays the project until after the election. Furthermore, there was going to be a meeting where Montefiore presented an alternative to their original plan. It was supposed to be held a couple of weeks ago. It was postponed until after the election because Senator Klein doesn't want to face the fact that that project could still be built and could, in fact, adversely affect the neighborhood. Now, with respect to the Broadway project, this is a project to provide some supportive housing to the mentally ill. I was chairman of the Mental Health Committee in the Mental Health and Disabilities Committee in the City Council. We've got to find housing. Senator Klein has spoken piously about the need to find supportive housing, and then when there's a supportive housing proposal, what does he do? He kills it. I don't think that putting 20 people in a building with 80 apartments with supervision is something that we should shy away from. I'm willing to support that kind of a project. But one thing I want to mention, he says he's against development. He's fighting against development. In the last 8 months, he has received $150,000 from 43 real estate developers.
Yeah,
is that the kind of
that was going to
legislator?
build some project that my community
yes,
didn't
it is.
support.
Yes, it is. Simone Construction.
Again,
Simone
I
Construction.
oppose this project, and we're going to continue to oppose this project. And this project will never be built to the magnitude that they set out to build. This is sort of a pattern here. You know, my opponent always knows best. He knows best as far as term limits, that you shouldn't have term limits, even though the voters have spoken twice. The term limits is what they want. He was even in the Daily News, was reported just the other day that at a concert he attended, which I sponsored, which had over 1,000 people, he said that the Morris Park community was narrow-minded. So he seems to always think he knows best for his community instead of listening to the community. And as far as the scheduling of a hearing, I'm a state senator. I'm not a community board member. Now he's criticizing the community board for not putting together a meeting. I have no control over a meeting.
You can have a quick comment, and then we're going to ask him a question.
My quick comment is that the thing was postponed because the developer asked it was be postponed, and he's the one who accepted the contribution from the developer. And one point on term limits. How many years have you served, Senator Klein? Do you believe in term limits? You've served for 20 years now.
Believe in
Do you believe in term limits?
You
don't believe in term limits.
I don't
right.
believe in term
limits. And I don't believe in term limits
However,
either. So we both agree on that,
if a referendum was passed
right.
and the will of the voters said
right.
that we should have term limits,
right.
I would never undo the will of the voters.
Well, that was allowed by the court, wasn't it?
Okay.
That was permitted.
Well, you didn't have to introduce the legislation.
But you don't believe in term limits.
I do not believe in term limits. We agree.
Senator,
I also didn't endorse Mayor Bloomberg. I endorsed Billy Thompson.
Senator,
We don't agree on that either.
let's talk about another controversial Bronx development project. It's not in the 34th district. I'm referring to the Fresh Direct controversy. You signed a letter recently regarding that project. It does raise some key concepts for all state legislators, and that is the promise of jobs a worthwhile investment for hundreds of millions of public dollars, especially when it might mean development that is unfavorable to the local community? Again, I realize that's not in this district, but you did sign the letter, and I'm just curious about how each of you feel about
Sure. Well,
that.
I certainly support the program. I want to create jobs in Bronx County. Unfortunately, we still have the dubious distinction of having the highest unemployment rate of any county in the state. But I stepped in last week because I found out that Fresh Direct was doing something that I will not stand for. They were trying to bypass the union, the commercial food workers. If those jobs are going to be created, they're going to be created as good union jobs with benefits and everything. So that's my position.
Well, the fact of the matter is that I was a strong supporter of the living wage law, which said that when the government gives a subsidy, the city gives a subsidy, they have to pay living wages. That is not applicable to the Fresh Direct project. And I think that as a result of that, I can't support it. That should include a promise by the developer to pay living wages, because it is true that jobs are very, very important, but they've got to be jobs that allow people to live, allow people to support their families, allow people to pay the rent and buy the food. So the living wage bill is a bill that I fought for. And I must say the borough president fought for it too. And I'm sorry that the borough president supported Fresh Direct without a living wage requirement.
You get the final word,
I
sir.
agree that jobs are very important to Bronx County, and it's why just last month I kicked off a new program called Bronx Hire. Working with the Bronx Chamber of Commerce, we're going to put together the first ever Bronx database of individuals looking for jobs, matching them with employees, and to ensure that these are good paying jobs, we're going to pay for any type of certification, any education, to make sure they really get jobs, but good paying jobs.
Gentlemen, in the few moments we have left, I'll ask you a question that I think you can each very well answer, and that is what makes this race so compelling is that both of you have long records of public service in the Bronx, decades worth in both cases. Which of you, and since this is your question, sir, which of you has the better record that voters should consider in this year's primary?
Well, I think that I have the better record because I have always stuck with the Democratic Party in the legislature and in the council, and Senator Klein has marred. He's done some good things. Look, I supported him in the past. He's done some good things in the past, but what he's done in the last 2 years to gain power, and incidentally a big $41,000 Lulu, but to gain power, he's made this deal with the Republicans, not only hurting the very programs I talked about, like the minimum wage and the DREAM Act and campaign finance reform, but empowering the Republicans for the future because they've raised over $5 million. In the paper today, the Republicans have 5 million, Democrats have 1 million. They wouldn't have 5 million, Senator Klein, if you hadn't given Dean
Senator,
Skelos power.
your response.
I'm very proud, of my record in the Assembly, my 8 years in the State Senate, and it's the reason why I have Mayor de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, and every Democrat that's within the Senate district supporting my candidacy. They know I get things done. I passed the most comprehensive, toughest gun law in the nation in the SAFE Act. I'm the reason why 54,000 4-year-olds will have free, full-day universal pre-K this coming school year. I'm the reason why senior citizens can stay in their homes and not have to worry about constant rent increases. These are the things that I accomplished, core Democratic legislative accomplishments, but there is now a new excitement. With any legislative session, there's things you accomplish, and you celebrate those victories, and then you roll up your sleeves and you get to work on the things that you didn't do. Campaign finance reform. No one fought harder than I do. I really feel we can get that done in the next legislative session with this new energy we have if we elect more Democrats. I'm in favor of the DREAM Act. As a matter of fact, I voted for the DREAM Act, put the bill on the floor, and it would have passed if all 32 duly elected Democrats voted for it that day. Two voted no.
30 seconds, and you'll get that since it was your question. You can respond.
Well, I would just say, interestingly enough, and I'm all in favor of gun control, in fact, the original assault weapon ban, which the SAFE Act improved on, I drafted when I was in the Assembly. I have a record of supporting choice. I voted for the abortion allowing for abortion in New York State. I was a critical vote in that. I voted for the Child Support Guidelines law. I voted for a law that provided protection for the disabled against discrimination.
We're
I have
just about out of time,
a long record of accomplishment.
And you can continue in your 1-minute closing statement, and then Mr. Klein will have the final word.
So ready for that?
We are ready.
Okay,
for
well,
that.
let me just say that it's very unfortunate that Senator Klein took the path he took, especially in the last 2 years where he made the alliance with the Republicans. But it's also unfortunate that he has some severe ethical lapses. And it was written in the New York Post that the Bronx lawmaker's pattern of behavior is far more slick than the shifting public persona. For years, thumbing his nose at city zoning regulations, getting tax breaks he isn't entitled to, and failing to disclose his assets to state officials. His ethical breaches range from dubious mortgage and scandal-scarred political donors to questionable court appointments. Now, who wrote that? The New York Post wrote that, and one of the reporters who wrote that is Candace Giove, who now works for the senator. So should we believe that, or should we believe what she's saying now? The fact, unfortunately, is that Senator Klein has allowed ambition to overcome his ability to do the best for his constituents.
Thank you very much.
Well,
You
you
get
know,
the final
that
words.
closing statement was sad and unfortunate, and it's really the tenor of my challenge's entire campaign. Personal attacks, disgusting accusations, and it's the reason why the voters don't want to be engaged in politics and in the process. I stand by my record, a record of accomplishment. I made the state Senate work. I passed most comprehensive, toughest gun law in the nation. I'm the person who managed to get universal pre-K, Mayor de Blasio's #1 priority, done $300 million each year over the next 5 years. I made New York more affordable for our senior citizens by helping them with their prescription drug costs and escalating rents. I'm very proud of the fact that I actually restored child care subsidies for working families, so working families can work and afford child care. These are the things that I stand for, accomplishing core legislative accomplishments, and I want to be able to continue to do that.
Incumbent Senator Jeff Klein, Mr. Oliver Capel, you have, I think, exhibited the best of the democratic process by being part of our program today. And
Thank you for
we
having
and
us.
the people of the Bronx, thank you for this dialogue.
Thank you.
And the folks, I'm sure both candidates will agree when I remind all the voters, whoever you're planning to vote for, you must come out and vote on primary day, Tuesday, September 9th. Next week, we'll present our final debate before the primary, featuring candidates in the 79th Assembly District. Our thanks to producer Dalia Gonzalez, director Bianca Ortiz. We'll see you next week.
G-morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back.
Are you with your friends? That's lame.
We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about?
Something I did.
Are you on your way to the
I'm
mall?
lonely.
Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.